especially as you look at the different sectors, and there are certain sectors that are generally associated with being red or with being blue. For example, defense, right, is commonly associated with the red, and blue might be green energy, for example. Are you seeing any other tells in other sectors that you are paying attention to or that you think are particularly interesting?
Well, I would say from a really big picture perspective, kind of broad sectors, I would say not especially. Although it is true that we've seen less enthusiasm for the aerospace and defense sector over the course of the last 6 months or so. We have seen a little bit of a rise in alternative energy types of stocks, which kind of may point one direction or the other. But I think that in many ways you would say that both parties might end up supporting things along those lines. So there haven't been any what I'd call really big tells. One of the things that people talk about significantly is the potential for Democratic leadership to really break up big tech, to break up big banks. And I would say that the market does not seem to be reflecting that, at least at this point, in terms of discounting, well, Joe Biden's in the lead by 6% or whatever it is, and we think that there's a higher likelihood he's going to break up or kind of sponsor legislation that would lead to a breakup of big tech. Obviously, big tech has been the place to be this year, and it has benefited more than any other industry within our entire economy from this pandemic. And so we're not seeing that play out from a big tech suffering with the prospect of a blue wave, if you will, in November. Banks, same thing. They haven't participated in this rally, but that has nothing to do with election considerations in our view. This has almost everything to do with interest rates. Right. And you can make the argument that banks are super cheap right now, at least relative to historical averages, but historical averages don't give you a 0% interest rate policy for the next 5 years, which is at least possible in this current time frame. And so banks are struggling. They're a weak part of the market, but not because, at least we don't believe, because of election considerations. So, maybe on the margins with certain individual companies and tiny little portions of the U.S. market, but in terms of kind of the major areas and what people think about typically as being kind of obviously blue or red areas, we're not seeing much in the way of a reaction to the market to these polls that seem to be forecasting more of a democratic change here.
Right. And what's interesting is even if we were, then our conversation would be like, okay, well, we're seeing discounting in these areas, but predictions can be wrong. So even if they are discounting and taking that into consideration, it doesn't mean that they're making the right call.
All you have to do, right, is look back 4 years ago.
Exactly.
And we were almost in the exact same space 4 years ago. Now, Hillary's lead 4 years ago was probably a little bit less than Biden's lead is today, but for all intents and purposes, we were in a very similar place 4 years ago. And obviously things were not what the market was expecting at that point. And so that was one of those times where you did see a big change in certain areas because there was a major surprise. Banks took off after the November 2016 election because a prospect for potentially a better economic policy or things along those lines. And so we did see that major change because there was a big surprise. Right now, I think the market is almost saying neither way would be a surprise. We're not going to put our eggs majorly in one basket or the other because A, we learned our lesson from 4 years ago, perhaps, and B, we also know that there's likely to be major contested, it's going to be a contested election, very likely. Almost no matter which party is in the leadership at the end of election day, this thing could drag on for days and weeks, in which case the courts have to get involved. And, that just adds so much uncertainty. And I think the market is saying we're not going to bid certain areas majorly up or down based on a prospect of uncertainty that is going to be with us for the foreseeable future, quite frankly.
That makes sense. That makes